Now, it goes without saying that in many lines of work, people work with data. And one of the most common places to store data is in a database. In this video, we will observe an example of connecting to a MySQL database using Python. Now, a MySQL database is one type of database. There are plenty of others such as Oracle, Postgres, and SQL Server, but we'll be using MySQL for this illustration. In this example, we will be connecting to an example dataset known as the Sakilla schema, which forms part of the sample datasets shipped when downloading MySQL onto your computer. Now, if you want to join along and set up your own database on your machine, you can download MySQL by following the link in the resources section. Now, alternatively, if you want to upskill in SQL and want to know how to use a database effectively, you can always enroll in my SQL Bootcamp, which will walk you through everything you need to know about querying databases effectively. You get 11 hours of video content and will make you into an SQL expert in no time. For those who simply want to observe what's possible, sit back and enjoy the video. Okay, so moving on to our example. Let's suppose we are about to embark on some data analytics and want to do it directly in a Jupyter notebook. The first step we need to take is to obtain data, and the data we want resides in the Sakilla schema, so we need to connect to our database. So firstly, we will import some libraries that enable us to connect to MySQL and also analyze the data. So we will import mysql.connector and also a library called pandas, which is used for data manipulation and analysis. We can then run this cell, and when a number appears next to the cell, we know it's run successfully. The next thing we need to do is create a connection object by using the connect method. So we will call this object mydb, and we will call the method by typing mysql.connector.connect. Now, the connect method accepts 4 arguments into the predefined parameters, which are host, user, password, and database. Now, just like you've been doing with methods already, we are able to pass in arguments to parameters which will then configure the method to perform some kind of action, in this case, creating a MySQL connection. So let's populate these parameters accordingly. So host for me will be local host, user will be root, the password for me is 0000, and the database will be Sakilla. Now, this is just database information that relates to my database. If you are using a different database, you will potentially need to use a different database connector, but the concept is the same. We need to establish a connection to the database. Now, here we could apply better practices and include an error handling code block, as well as a configuration file which stores all of the connection details, which would then handle the sensitive information more confidentially. But let's continue nonetheless. We now need to instantiate a MySQL cursor object from the connection object we've just created. So let's call our cursor object myCursor, and we will then put equals mydb.cursor with parentheses. So we're calling the cursor method on our mydb object, which we know is that connection to the MySQL database. Next, we can use the myCursor object to execute a query by calling the execute method on it. So we can type myCursor.execute, and then we can open a set of brackets. Inside of these brackets, we can enter SQL code that we want to be executed. So for this example, seeing as some of you may not have touched SQL before, I'm simply going to put a query that states select star from customer inside of quotes. Now to translate this just means select all the columns and rows of data from the table named customer, which sits inside of the Sequila database. Now to see the result accordingly, we need to create an object that will store the result. So we can type my result equals my cursor dot, and then we can call the fetch all method on the my cursor object. We can then end by printing the result by typing for x in my result, simply print x. Now as you can see, the result obtained is not that friendly on the eye. So we can take advantage of the pandas library, which will enable us to create what is known as a data frame, and this will look more like an Excel table with rows and columns, much more easy to read. Now pandas is one of my most used libraries, and this is why I'll be covering the pandas library and data analytics using Python in a different course. There is so much to cover. But for now, simply observe how I use pandas in this video. So to put it into a better format, we will create a data frame called df. We can then obtain the column names using the following code and assign them to our data frame. Once again, I will not go into any detail here what this code means. Just note that I'm storing my results in a data frame and assigning the respective column names as headers for each column. Now to see the data, we can now type df and then access the head method on this object. And if we enter 5, we will get the first 5 rows of data from the database table. Now note here that the default setting for the head method is 5, but if we change this to say 10, we will get 10 records back in total. As you can see, it's much more friendly on the eye compared to the prior format when reading the database data. We can now explore and leverage the power of Python to analyze our data. So let's see how many Marys we have in our dataset. We could filter for Mary by typing df and then opening up square brackets and then passing first underscore name as a string into the brackets. This basically selects the first name column from the database table. We can then put the double equal sign and then stipulate the string Mary. And then to pull back the result in a data frame, we can proceed it with df, then open square brackets, and then close the square brackets at the end. When I run this line of code, we can see that we only have one Mary. Now what we've done here is very basic, but hopefully this has proven useful in understanding how we can connect to a database to perform analytics using Python, in this case the MySQL connector and the pandas library, as well as using SQL. Now the options are endless, and I hope this has got you interested in expanding your data science toolkit by picking up SQL as well in order to blend a powerful language like Python with the querying essentials that SQL provides.